Hello, friends. Today's chapter of the day is Matthew chapter 14. And Matthew chapter 14 is really a great study in comparison between three different men. We have a weak man, the perfect man, and a man who's kind of going from weak towards that perfect man. So we start with Herod. Now he discusses John the Baptist, but Herod is really the character in the story. And we see Herod, a man who is driven by sensuality, driven by lust, and who's really a coward. I mean, we hear about Herod the Tetrarch, and it sounds like that must be a really important title, but a tetrarch is one who is in charge of a quarter of the kingdom. So that doesn't really convey a lot of power. Herod was pretty limited in his power, and he wanted to get everything he could out of it, and he was very afraid of losing that power. And that's what we see. We see Herod's wife and her daughter kind of leverage his weakness to use the crowd to get them to do what they want, not what he wants, which is to kill John the Baptist. So Herod does it. You notice that she says in verse 8, "Give me the head of John the Baptist here on a platter," which means do it right now, because she knew Herod was weak when the crowds were around, because he wanted to please the crowd. On the other side of that, Jesus, in verse 13, hears of John's death and withdrew. And he wanted to be by himself to kind of absorb it and worship through it and think about God and connect himself to the Father. But his time there wasn't long, because very shortly after he gets this news, he goes to all the people who are following him. The crowds had followed him on foot from the towns in verse 13. And he sees a great crowd and has compassion on them and heals the sick. And even when the disciples say, "Send them away, tell them to go back home and feed themselves," he says, "No, we're going to take care of them." So this great man, the perfect man, Jesus, says, this is what men do. They don't bow to the crowds. They aren't controlled by the crowds. But they love the world around them. And they love the world around him in truth. He didn't just do things for them. He wasn't just a vending machine for the crowds around them. He was there to teach them truth, and every opportunity, even when he was stricken by grief for his friend and his relative, John the Baptist, Jesus was ready to teach. And right after that, we see Jesus walking on the water. We see the power of God over nature. Not only is he healing the sick, but he's defying the laws of physics. He's walking on water. We kind of see this as sort of a trick that Jesus did. But he changed the laws of physics to do that, or suspended them, or whatever he did, because he's Jesus and we don't understand. But in that moment, we see Peter. And we see Peter as a man who's going from that Herod the Tetrarch kind of character towards that Jesus character. And we see it because he asks Jesus. He understands Jesus' power. And he says in verse 28, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." And that kind of translates funny, but my understanding is it's not if it is you, but since it's you. I know it's you. I know you can do it. Command me to come out there, because you can make me do that just like you can. So there's this faith. There's this little faith. And we see that later on. Peter gets scared and starts to sink, and Jesus, verse 31, reaches out and says, "Oh, you of little faith." And really, may we all be of little faith, because the faith the size of a mustard seed is strong enough to move mountains. So Peter does have little faith. His faith wavers because he gets overwhelmed with the cares of the world. But he's got faith. He knows who Jesus is, and he knows where to look when he starts to get shaken. And that's the message from this. Look to the real men. Look to the real people of character around you. And ultimately, look to Jesus, because those real people of character, the only character they can have that's worth anything is the character that points others to Christ. If you're around a person who seems confident, seems like they have all the answers, but isn't pointing you to Christ, they're actually pointing you away. And be really cautious of that and run from it. But if you've got someone else who, when you're with them, they draw you closer to Christ. They grow you in your appreciation of Christ. Whether they're a teacher or just a friend who has that effect on you by the kind of person they are and the way they worship God, that's who you need to be looking for. Because there are two ends of this spectrum. There's the worldly, selfish, weak, scared end, where people like Herod the Tetrarch live, where even if they become the king, they're still going to be weak and selfish because they don't have what they need. Because what they need is Jesus. To the other end, where you have Jesus, where you have strength, you have wisdom, you have power, and you have satisfaction. When you're living like Jesus and when you're looking to Jesus, you're not looking to the crowd to satisfy you because your satisfaction has already happened. So that's the message from this. Jesus rules over nature, and he is the perfect example of how we need to live our lives. So this week, as you read through Matthew, as you're reading through wherever you're reading in Scripture, find that satisfaction and that completeness and those answers in Jesus, because he's got them and he's the only one who's got them. God bless you all.